With our model now prepped for symmetry and asymmetry, we can begin to unwrap our pieces. And I do need to say that after third thoughts, I did decide to make these two pieces asymmetrical. As you can see, our mirror modifiers are still turned off, which reminds me, if we look in our Python console, you'll see that we have started from scratch. So anything you type in the console is not saved in any type of way in the context of a Blender scene. So if you found that function useful and want to use it on a regular basis, I recommend that you convert that to an operator with a button, just like I have done in my own personal tool set. Here under display mirrors, I can turn them on and off. So from now on, I'll just leave them on. And I apologize, I'm not making my personal tool set available because it's an extreme work in progress. Some things work, some things don't, and it's very catered to my workflow. So I'd rather not release it in its current state, but thought you might benefit from that one tool. And I try hard not to ever use this tool set when I record training. But anyway, we don't need the Python console anymore. I'm going to switch this to the UV image editor. And when it comes to the concept of unwrapping, along with it comes the idea of UV seams. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to focus on this piece by itself. I'm going to go into local view, and then we'll tab into edit mode with everything selected. Let's hit U unwrap. And here you can see a flattened version of our mesh. However, if we maximize that viewport and hit N to bring up our view properties, I'm going to enable this stretch setting. And when we first enable it, it looks actually pretty good. It's all a consistent blue color. We do start to get some variation into the greens down here, which does represent the face angle differences from the UV image editor to the 3D view. But more importantly, if we look at the area of stretching, this tells a different story. The varied colors all the way from bright red to royal blue tells us that we have some significant stretching going on. And by stretching, I mean that for these faces down here that are bright red, their size is much smaller or just much different than it is in the 3D view. And this is a problem because once we get our texture created, let's say we painted a texture with these UVs. As you know, a digital image is comprised of many pixels. And so the pixels that would cover these red faces would appear much larger in the 3D view. You might even see the individual square pixel. However, for these large faces up here, the pixels would appear much smaller. And so the goal with UV unwrapping is to get as little stretching as possible. And this is where UV seams come in handy. So if I switch over to edge mode, and oh wow, look at that. The modeler of this helmet, which would be me, left some bad topology right here. We've got a 5-sided polygon that is plain ugly. So if we were in a production pipeline, maybe I could send this back to the modeler, have him fix it, and then send it back to me. Or I could just fix it myself real quick. Let's do that. Alt-M, merge at the center for both of these edges. Now we're left with quadded topology. Do the same thing on the other side. Shift-R. There we go. Topology crisis averted. But since I applied my mirror modifier already, that change does not make it over to the other side. So we can simply delete those edges, add another mirror modifier. And just to be safe, let's choose faceplate as our mirror object. And now we can apply in object mode. And the change has made it, no it has not. Must have just made a careless mistake. Yeah, right there. Okay, let's get rid of that vertex in the selection, delete the vertices, and add that mirror modifier again. There we go. Fixed topology on both sides, as well as the ability to unwrap both individually. Okay, so anyway, where was I? Okay, yeah, seams. If I select all of my pieces again, let's run the unwrap command so that we can see both of our pieces. Get rid of our view properties. I can select certain edges that I want to be seams. For example, we have some sort of squared off shapes happening with very hard edges like right here. And when we try to unwrap that, the faces along this edge are very constricted from unwrapping flat, and that's what causes stretching. Whereas if I hit Control E with these edges selected and choose Mark Seam, and now select everything and unwrap again, we can see that this one piece is almost completely blue. And the more blue they are, the better, meaning that the faces in the UV image editor match the face angle and the face size in the 3D view. So blue is the goal. Green, yellow, and red are what we want to avoid. So now that I've cut that seam, our one piece has unwrapped much better, but then this new piece that has been separated off, which is called a UV island, it's not unwrapping properly. But we have begun the refining process. Now, to refine our UVs, we will be selecting a lot of edges, marking seams, maybe clearing some seams. So to constantly hit U unwrap will be annoying and very inefficient. Lucky for us, Blender has a live unwrap feature. So in edit mode, if I go over to my options panel, you can see this live unwrap toggle. Now I have it on. It should be off by default. So if we turn it on there and then jump over to the UV image editor and click this button, which syncs the selection, in case you haven't noticed, what I select in the 3D view by default only displays in the UV image editor, and then I have selecting ability on top of what's in the 3D view. By clicking this button, they're synced. So whatever I click in the UV image editor also is selected over here. And so with those two things enabled, I can select edges and click mark as a seam. Let's try this one right here. Control E, mark seam. You'll see that our UV island unwrapped automatically based on the new seam that we added. Now our unwrap is looking really good except for this piece that's been separated. And I think that the problem is this large cylindrical extrusion inward. So if I mark this as a seam, Control E, mark seam, now this front piece has laid out almost entirely blue, so that looks great, but the cylinder itself does not unwrap well. So I'm going to choose an edge lengthwise for the cylinder. Also on this upper side, because it's hidden, you won't ever see that. Another rule of thumb for seams is to hide them whenever possible. So if I mark this as a seam, now the cylinder unwraps very, very well. And this entire piece is unwrapped well. However, one thing that I like to do is keep my pieces a little more consolidated, because big picture what I'm doing here is I'm unwrapping my individual pieces one by one, but then ultimately I will compile them into one large UV map so I can use one texture for the entire helmet. And once I get to that stage, these pieces that are separate, they can go any direction, disconnected from one another. So in order to make sure that I know that this island over here belongs with this island, I'm simply going to choose one edge along this first seam that I cut, right here, Control E, and we'll clear the seam. And now my unwrap is still very clean, but it's attached right there. So this is one UV island instead of two. As far as the cylinder, there's not much I can do about that one. It'll probably end up floating off completely disconnected from this piece, but since it is a hole that I think has a screw attached to it, let's see, let's leave local view. Yeah, so there's a screw in there, which renders the cylinder unimportant. So I don't really care where that piece of the UV island goes. And let's go back to local view to finish up unwrapping this piece. Tab into edit mode. So this one on the left side is complete, but the right side is still looking bad. So since it is symmetrical, I can simply select one of my seams, hit Shift G to bring up the Select Similar menu, and I can choose Seam right here, and it will select all edges that are seams. And then I can come down here to the Select menu and choose Mirror, and it will select the other side. Now by default, the Extend option is usually turned off, so it will only select the mirrored mesh components. But if we turn that on, it keeps the original selection. And with those other verts or edges selected, I can hit Control E, mark seam, and now both sides are very evenly unwrapped. And that's going to be all for this first small piece as kind of a crash course in UV unwrapping. But as you can see, we have to do that for all these other pieces. So in the next lesson, we'll unwrap another piece and go from there.